us know that you love this ministry.
John, recently, tax day, they had marches all over America demanding the president's taxes. They wanted to see his income tax report. What's going on in America where, you know, all these people gather all at the same time in the same place? How can they all gather together? How can they all, every city, they're marching, they're all doing this. Who's setting this up? And yet the reporters all believe it. They're feeding us a line. America's unrestful. They're waiting to be. They just can't wait to get the president's tax return, and they're revolting because of it.
To answer your question very briefly, I'd say this: is we lay out, as we do when we brief and teach and train law enforcement or leaders. The jihadi movement, the terrorist movement in the United States, is working directly in conjunction with the hard left Marxist movement. So whether we're talking about any of the Soros-funded groups, including Black Lives Matter, at the ground level, at the state level, at the national level, and at the international level, they are working together. And there are a lot of common threads that tie them together. And to kind of punctuate that, I'll just say this. During the 1980s, 100% of the anti-nuclear protests in Europe and the United States were funded by the Soviet Union. 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 people don't randomly just pop up with pre-printed signs and a complete logistical plan out of nowhere. You're correct about that. This is all, when you see these things, whether it's in Ferguson or Baltimore or New York or wherever, they are planned and they are funded by enemies of the United States.
Yeah.
Joel, have you studied any of that yourself?
Wow.
You know, it's when I look at these sort of things, I look at the rage. There's a spirit of rage that has just swept the nation. I look at the riots in Berkeley. They're burning things, and you know, Ferguson and this sort of thing. I go, okay, what's behind this? What's the spiritual issue? Because now look, Black Lives Matters. There's a very sacred issue there that much of the black community feels, and that's legitimate. But then Satan comes along and he subverts it, and he gets these folks that they preempt it. What I think is happening is sort of a prelude. What I see all of this rage, I see Psalm 2. Why do the Gentiles gather? Why do they conspire? Why do they plot a vain thing? And it's not against Donald Trump. Now, on the outside, in the natural, we hate Donald Trump, we're furious about this, we're furious about that. But the scriptures say they gather and they plot, ultimately, against the Lord and against his anointed. And there's a lack of logic. There's a rage that comes over. And, you know, they're protesting what? They don't like that Donald Trump is a warmonger, and therefore they're going to break and destroy. You know, there's a fundamental cognitive dissonance. There's a detach, and so we need to recognize the spirit that's behind it. It's much bigger than just the most recent elections or this sort of thing. There is a rebellion that's rising up throughout the nations. And I think we're going to just see it continue to increase.
What we saw both from the Soviet Union and now we see from the Islamic movement, which is the same thing we see from the hard left movement, is a destruction of reason. If we know that wisdom comes from reverence for the Lord, and we take the Lord, we take God out of the schools, we take God out of the public square, this is just as simply the natural outcome of what the result is going to be. So this shouldn't surprise us.
You know, and let me add to this too, because you're talking about some of the groups that are funding some of these movements. In the past, it was the Soviets. The Soviets spent, I don't know the exact numbers, it was a ridiculous amount of money on their global propaganda campaign. Presently, when you really get down to the foundation, what is the single largest financial corrupting influence in Washington? What is the single greatest foreign lobby power? Some people say it's the World Bank, it's this, that, or the other thing. It's a single family. It's a single government, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The Saudi royal family is the single greatest financially corrupting influence in our nation, from presidents to senators, you name it, corporations, media outlets. And ultimately behind that is the funding of this, forget the Soviet Union, The largest propaganda campaign in human history has been funded by Saudi Arabia.
That's
and that's a big part of what's behind all of this.
That's absolutely true.
How likely is it that they're planning something for the United States of America?
Well, they absolutely are. We know right now the Muslim Brotherhood of the United States is ramping up their efforts. And I'll just, 30 seconds, the U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations is the Muslim Brotherhood's mothership in the United States. And the leaders of that are the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. And they have literally set up regional controlling entities, regional councils, all the way down to individual mosques throughout the United States. Now, they're still coordinating that, but literally from a point of communications, logistics, all of that is being coordinated from the U.S. CMO all the way down to individual mosques. And so all the things UTT that we've been talking about and laying out that they've been doing, they are now accelerating. And we can get into it in a little more depth, but they have significantly impacted this new administration and have thwarted a lot of their offensive efforts, meaning the president's efforts to quell the Muslim Brotherhood have been stopped because of their efforts, and quite frankly, a lot of it funded by Saudi Arabia.
In my opinion, when you see the rage of Satan directed against something, that's usually evidence that God is involved. Because Satan is enraged in that which God is doing in the earth.
Yeah.
And yes, there's a lot of rage at Donald Trump, and I'll be honest, I wrestled through a lot of issues during the early part of the campaign. But I've become solidly convinced in my spirit that the Lord is using this administration. He's doing something quite powerful. And it's for that reason that the rage of Satan, this irrational rage of Satan, is so directed toward this man. And so this is one of the reasons. Again, he's certainly not perfect. He's not, just God's gift to the world. But I mean, in many ways, this is the one that the Lord has chosen to use right now. And so we as the church are responsible to get behind him, to pray for him, to pray for everyone involved, and say, Lord, accomplish your goals through this administration.
Amen.
What is our biggest threat from the Islamic movement?
Iran. Coupled, I mean,
Why?
you've got two pieces that are opposed to one another, Iran, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia from the financial standpoint, but the largest funder of Hamas is Iran right now, and Hamas, that is the Muslim Brotherhood. So there are a lot of, the other thing is Iran has a huge amount of influence globally and is obviously a greater danger if it becomes a nuclear threat. If we understand the global Islamic movement, we understand that they are in fact not focused on us yet. They are still focused on the Muslim world. And they're focused on the Muslim world to get Muslims to adhere to Sharia, because it's all about Sharia. They want to impose Sharia on the world. It's the stated objective of Islam. It's the only stated objective of Islam, to impose Sharia on the world until you have an entire world under Sharia, under one man, a caliph, and then you have peace as they define it. So that's what it is. When they turn, and as we talked about last time, they're in the process of turning towards the West. You will see the Islamic armies in Europe, not just individual attacks of 2 guys, 4 guys, 8 guys. When you start seeing much larger numbers, we're going to take notice of that. And when we start seeing that in the United States, it will be what we're seeing, which is an increase of individual jihadis, which is a part of the law of jihad, and then eventually much larger numbers. And when we train law enforcement, and we just ask the question, are you ready for, let's just keep it simple, 12 jihadis with automatic weapons, hand grenades, mortars, shoulder-fired rockets in your city? Are you ready to deal with that? And I've never had one of them say yes.
Wow.
And that's what I'm talking about. That's not fear-mongering. They do what they say they're going to do. They say they're going to do these things. And so far in the last 30, 40 years, they're actually doing it.
Yes, they are.
What is Sharia law? So people...
Sharia law is just simply, if you're a Muslim, you would just say it's God's laws. They believe it's the laws that Allah, their God, commands them to live by and impose upon the world.
Thou shalt not kill.
Well, yeah, not exactly.
Not really.
Thou shalt not kill another Muslim. The problem is every other Muslim is usually an apostate. So right now we have something, the word that's been very popular lately is convergence. We have a convergence of multiple issues all coming together right now. If you look at the history of warfare, you see these punctuated moments where things just take a quantum leap forward. In 1453, after multiple tries, you finally had Mehmet the Conqueror, Mehmet Fatih, who was able to take Istanbul or Constantinople, which he renamed as Istanbul. Why was he able to do that? Because that is the time when they finally developed gunpowder. All of a sudden, the whole world changed. Well, right now, we have, in terms of a convergence, we have dramatic new technologies. You think about it now, someone can take an iPad through the airport, and that thing can be a bomb.
Right.
So this is one issue, is new technologies. We have things, crazy things, drones the size of mosquitoes and things that are undetectable. Now, of course, security technology is developing as well. You know, we're creating billions of sensors, and, you know, the eye in the sky, so to speak, is everywhere. But beyond that, we have information technology. We have social media. You look at ISIS. ISIS was able to recruit over 30,000 young kids from all over the world to come and join their movement. They made jihad, they made ISIS seem cool to many of these, not just kids, but most often kids. There's a movie called Inception, and in that they say the hardest virus to cure someone of is an idea. So if you can implant an idea into someone's mind to where they believe it's their own idea, how do you get that out? So here's the point. If you can get the idea into some kid's mind that, not just any idea, God wants him to use these new technologies or random technologies that he can learn on the internet to go out and randomly kill himself and others. How can you stop that?
You can't.
You can't stop that. And so, you know, we're in this race to develop new technology to be able to stop this. There's no way of stopping it if this movement continues to grow, which it is. Again, 30,000 young kids recruited to one of the most evil, vile movements in the history of mankind. We haven't recruited 3,000 young people to go to the Middle East to proclaim the gospel.
Right.
They are crushing us in terms of the propaganda machine. And if this movement continues to grow and spread, then absolutely it's going to explode across the United States. I think Europe is just a small prelude to what we're going to see all over the world. And unfortunately, we do. We have to get used to it. I'm not saying we have to accept it, but we have to prepare ourselves for it, absolutely.
Right. And I'll just quote the most widely used 7th grade textbook in Islamic schools in the United States, which says this: Islam is not a religion, it is a complete way of life. And it goes on to say the duty of the citizen is to be loyal to the Islamic State. Now that's taught to American Muslims in Islamic schools here in the United States. And that's the book they use more than any other to teach Islam. It's called What Islam is All About. And I discuss it frequently, and we teach with it. But it says that Islam's a complete way of life, social, cultural, military, political, and religious, all governed by Islamic law, Sharia. And that the stated purpose of Islam is to ensure that Sharia is the law of the land in the entire world. So, yes, Sharia adherent Muslims have penetrated our system, but it's worse than that. I would argue, and that my challenge, which has been very public, is find a senior Islamic advisor at the State Department, in the White House, the National Security Staff, the Pentagon, the FBI, CIA, DHS, DIA, who is a Muslim, who is not part of this jihadi network. Now, they may not be Muslim brothers, but they are ideologically aligned. It's the idea that Sharia has to be the law of the land, that Islam has to dominate everything else. They are seeking to overthrow the government, which is where we have to draw the line.
Wow.
And so that's where they join what you were speaking about earlier. That's where they join the hard left Marxist movement, is they want to overthrow the government. They want to create a situation where there's so much chaos that Islam comes down, lays the hammer down, and they offer the solution. And to many people, it will seem like a better solution. You still have people in the Soviet Union today said, well, you know, yeah, Stalin killed 30 million, but we had, you know, a loaf of bread on the table. I mean, this is that's how powerful these ideas are.
Yeah.
And we need to understand that our system has been penetrated. These things that we've been seeing that have been happening have been intentional. First by the Soviet Union, by the hard left Marxists, by the Islamic movement. There are a number of movements working together here. But well over 60 years, this has been going on. We have not been intentional. We have not been intentional, I would argue, and based on going around the country and training citizens, law enforcement, members of Congress, speaking with national leaders, there is a gross, just a huge vacuum of understanding of our founding principles. A huge vacuum. In our Declaration, it says our founding is based on the law of nature and nature's God. And legally, that is defined in Blackstone's commentaries as the law of nature, how we exhibit, how God exhibits himself in nature. And the law of nature's God is legally described as Holy Scripture. That's the basis for our legal and political, our governmental system. Try teaching that in a public school today. And yet that's all that was taught for the first couple hundred years, certainly 150 years in this country. It's what was taught in our law schools. And so it was an intentional assault, which is what I love about Joel's work, but because he peels that back. It's an assault not just against our founding principles, but if it's an assault on our founding principles, it's assault on God and God's word and God's church. And so God's church has to make an effort to actually fight against it. And it isn't by hiding in your closet and just praying. He gave us hands and feet to go out and do something about it. And we're called to do something about it.
Yes.
You know, I've been saying for years that the first of the four horsemen is going to be verbal, verbal warfare, and that it's the spirit of Antichrist. And I'm convinced that's where we are. I believe it's been a war of words, and it's soon going to be a war that includes bombs. It's going to include, and it is including bombs now, but it's going to be beyond anything we've ever seen before. I want everybody to order this set of books today because I want you to read what's going on and find out for yourself, people. Don't put your head in the ground and say, I'm just going to ignore everything, because I'm telling you, you're going to wake up and it's going to be too late. Do you know people are preparing? We're getting more orders for food than we have in months and months and months. People are starting to prepare because they know something's happening. We're going to want to talk this week, in the next 24 hours, we want to talk about North Korea. What is going on? What is happening there? And you know, I got 3 letters. I don't know if Bill Fortune has ever, Dr. Fortune, if he's ever written me a letter. But and within 24 hours, he's written to me about 4 letters. And let me just say, can I just read just a piece of it? I don't have time today, but I'm just going to take a couple sentences. Doing a lot of prayer today. We are facing the brink of war, and the next 2 days shall be tense. I mean, this is day to day what he's writing me. Will the dictator of North Korea take a step back from the brink? Or is he so driven by evil that he will push the world into a full-scale war? We are potentially reaping the bitter harvest of closing our eyes to the threat of this evil ever since 1994. And he goes on, and he feels that even Clinton and Bush and Obama didn't deal with this man and didn't deal with this, and now it's growing and growing and growing. And I'm wondering what you're saying today. We've heard it, we see it. I'll tell you, when Joel Richardson first came and brought this book to me, The Islamic Antichrist, it so shook me, and I hope people are reading it. I don't know what to do. I feel like I should be making some headway in America. He says, if this confrontation goes hot, President Trump is going to need an outpouring of prayer and support. This is coming from one of the top college professors, I think, in America, Dr. William Fortune, who has written about what could happen. What some call recklessness, the same thing said of Churchill. I will call the courage to confront evil for what it is. Do you believe there's infiltration of the United States of America by our enemies? They're in hiding and just maybe even have arms
right, so,
hidden?
Yes, so you're talking about the actual military side. So yes, we know actually 12 years ago, 13 years ago, the CIA director testified in open setting that Hezbollah had at least 12 cells here in the United States. Now that's in an unclassified setting before the U.S. Congress. Imagine 12, I believe it was 2005. And so imagine what that number actually was then and what it may be now. And that's just Hezbollah. And we know, for instance, that they are working directly with the cartels and with other groups using the tunnel systems in the southern part of the United States, working with countries like Venezuela and others. And we know, as testified to in open setting by Director Mueller of the FBI, the previous FBI director, that they actually have camps where they teach them to learn enough Spanish so when they come across the southern border, if they get caught, we assume they're just Mexicans and send them back.
So you don't think the president's crazy to build a wall?
I do not. It's a responsibility of the president to protect the sovereignty of the United States.
I want to ask both of you. Do either one of you believe that the jihadi threat against America, that they have a 0 hour, that they plan something in the future to launch a threat at a certain time, or maybe a whole group at one time of explosions?
So here's the thing. You really have two, to simplify this, you have two primary groups. You have the Sunnis. You have the Saudi-sponsored Salafis, the Wahhabis. This is Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram. These are the guys that are raising up the 18, 20-year-old kids with AK-47s. They're doing suicide bombings, truck rammings, random jihad acts, right? Then you have Iran. Iran is very different than these Al-Qaeda types. Iran is an incredibly sophisticated, calculating, patient, well-funded entity, and they have, of course, control over Hezbollah and Assad and the Iraqi government. Think of this, by the way. Iran right now controls 3 foreign capitals: Baghdad, Damascus, and Beirut. Iran is incredibly powerful, but add to that the fact that they have nuclear weapons. But here's the thing, is that if Iran, and because people always say, Iran is the single greatest state sponsor of terror. And you go, but every terrorist act I see is usually a Sunni, not a Shia, suicide bomber, truck rammer, or whatever. So you go, where's all this Iranian state-sponsored terror? When Iran does something, it's grand. So if we were to see a Hezbollah action, if something developed between the United States and Iran, it's not just going to be a truck rams a Christmas parade. It's going to be massive. Now, we're going to see the random Sunni jihad acts continue to spread. Like I said, you can't stop it. But when Iran acts, if they act, it's likely to be something far greater than just these little random acts. Would that be pretty accurate?
Yes.
What group was 9/11 then?
So that was Al-Qaeda, and that's Sunni Muslims. But I would concur, if we look just in the last 30 years, Iran did the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut, the embassy there in Beirut. By the way, according to the 9/11 report and reports since, Iran was directly involved with helping Al-Qaeda in 9/11 by training them in bombing techniques, allowing them to come into Iran without any stamping of their passports, so that would not raise any red flags in the United States or Europe. So that's all documented in the 9/11 report. So Iran is significantly already involved. They provided weapons and ammunition and direct logistical support to Al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood fighters in Iraq against the United States, and we did nothing. So they have directly already joined our enemies in actual combat against us, and we have still not responded as of today. Referring to 0 hour, that's actually a term that the Muslim Brotherhood uses to talk about that moment when they kick off the jihad here in the United States as an organized military effort. And that is not based on a timeline per se. It's based on milestones that they reach to get to a point where they've got the logistical support, the means, and they're ready to go. Right now, they don't believe they need to do that because right now this administration has completely pulled back on the idea of designating the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. And we've pulled back on vigorously pursuing the over 200 unindicted co-conspirators in the Holy Land Foundation trial, which was the largest terrorism financing and Hamas trial ever successfully prosecuted in American history. And that was the largest Islamic charity in America when it was indicted in 2001, and it was a terrorist group. It was a Hamas organization. So they see it as they don't need to do that yet. So it's based on activity, not based on a particular date, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does.
9/11 was such an attack. How did they get by with it? How did they do all of this when people will say, oh, there's no problems in America? You know, but yet all the experts I talk to tell me there's infiltration in the country. It's been happening for a long time. And yet the Twin Towers, our two biggest buildings basically, were brought to the ground. And we didn't know it.
Right. Well, we actually did know that they were plotting something, and we had a lot of intelligence. And so we can go back and look at it now, and we can make excuses. But there were FBI agents, I mean, the FBI agent in Phoenix, Arizona, who specifically was pounding on the door of FBI headquarters saying, we have a problem. And it seems to be imminent. And we had all kinds of warning bells going off from April, May, June of 2001 through the summer. But we couldn't put our finger on it. I think the greatest problem we have is we have yet to understand that 100% from 9/11 and even before, but from 9/11 to today, every one of these individuals that we were talking about have been up to, the Fort Lauderdale shooting at the airport there by a Muslim jihadi, giving you the Tawheed sign, the oneness of Allah, right there on his Facebook picture, to right up to the attack in Spain today, technically yesterday our time, where, another young man, Muslim man, drives a car through a crowd and plows people over, screaming Allahu Akbar. 100% of them say, I am a Muslim waging jihad in the cause of Allah to establish a caliphate under Sharia law. And so until we recognize the problem is Islam, then we won't pursue the places where Islam is being taught in its pure form in the Islamic centers and Islamic organizations here in the United States. Certainly not in Europe. I mean, Europe is suicidal from my perspective.
Why did we give them so much money?
Right. That's the question.
Why did we give them? Why did we
did. You mean the President of the United States?
Yeah.
That's us.
Yeah.
We elect our president. So our president,
yes,
the United States of America, at one point he gave a plane load of money,
yes,
few
hundreds of billions of dollars to
cash,
which, by the way, is against the law.
Wow.
That's against the law. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why? Well, I would just say.
When are we going to wake up?
Well, let him answer the question.
No, I will. But I'm going to go. You can just take over. You got hours here.
I told you last time, never tell a Marine he can take over.
That's good. No, seriously, why? Go tell us.
Well, because I think that our previous president was batting for the other team. I mean, I think that's the problem, and I think he violated the law. Well, I don't think that. He provided weapons and ammunitions to terrorists in Libya and other places. He gave money to the largest state sponsor of terrorism on the planet in violation of U.S. federal law.
And got away with it.
And got away with it.
And got
a lot more.
away with it.
Do you have Secret Service around you?
No, I do not.
No, boy. You got a lot of faith, don't you?
I do.
And now we have a president that wants to try to shift the tide, so to speak, and yet there are people embedded in the organization.
But look at the millions in America, our youth, millions in the streets marching on anything that have been won over to that cause. They're standing up for the people who plan our destruction.
Well,
What's going on, guys? Come on.
They're enraged at the one who actually wants to save their lives.
Yeah.
You know,
There it is.
Yeah.
Years
There
ago.
it is.
That's why you're on a list, I bet. Are you on
That's
are you
a
on
good
some
answer.
lists?
I'm on several lists.
Yeah, I thought. Yeah. Good. But
That's
here
all
you
And
are.
they're not the kind you want to be on.
No,
right?
they all,
Yeah.
most of the people want you to know what kind of list I'm talking about. I'm on all those lists too.
Yeah.
The Bible says that in the final days, it's going to take a day's labor to get a loaf of bread.
Right.
I have several loaves of bread right now that's in this product. That's what, 26 cents a serving.
Right now it is.